Boom, 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 boom. Welcome to History with Mr. Williams. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing with you here is just going to show you how to do the 4 marker in Whitechapel, which is actually question 2b, to be or not to be. So if I just zoom in here very quickly and show you, so this here is our crime and punishment paper, and the first section is on Whitechapel. Okay, so you have your describe 2 features of, how useful are sources A and B for an inquiry, and then finally this is the question I'm going to focus on, which actually is 2. So that's question 1, question 2A, and this is 2B. So how would you follow up source A or B to find out more about? And that's where 4 marks. Now before I could show you how to actually do this and how we go about answering this question, we first of all need to acquaint ourselves with lots of different historical sources, because these at the end of the day what you're going to be using as an historian to learn more about a certain event or certain thing. So for example, I've just got the first 4 here. There's a total of 8 that I use. I know Miss Ashton might use different ones as well. Okay. So for example, Charles Booth survey. This is a source that historians can use, where Charles Booth basically carried out a survey of the housing and living conditions within Whitechapel. So that'd be very useful, as you can see there. If we wanted to learn about people's houses and what the conditions were like. We could even look at local police records from H Division. So there it would have been recorded who was on duty, types of crimes committed, police reports, etc. London newspapers. Now these are really good if you ever want to know about anything to do with the public's opinion, mainly because people would voice their opinions here, or have discussions. They might even have interviews with various people, and would obviously talk a lot about Jack the Ripper murders. But remember, the question may not be on Jack the Ripper murders. It could be on other aspects of Whitechapel. You could have a census. Again, census every 10 years. The government basically asks people where they live, what they did, and what their occupation was, etc., etc., their religion. So that gives a good idea about who's living in Whitechapel and what they're doing in terms of Jewish population, etc. Council records, very similar to that. Basically, how many people are living within each borough. Again, can lead us to learn about overcrowding. Coroner's records, so again, they would then use reports by pathologists, etc., to establish how and why people died, in terms of the injuries to them. If you ever wanted to learn more about a body, these would be really good. Workhouse records, again, basically who lived at the workhouse at a certain period of time, or how many inmates there were, what was happening, and then finally and lastly, photographs. So obviously, but you have to be aware that in the time period we're talking about, we have to be realistic, knowing that photographs weren't used quite often, but were mainly actually used of things like crime scenes, or the bodies at least after crime scenes. Okay, now having referenced those sources that a historian may use above, I'll come back and talk more about them in a second. However, this is what the actual question looks like, so it will always be phrased in a similar way to this. Okay, so for example, how could you follow up source B to find out more about, and then it will simply change this bit here. Okay, if I can highlight it, it'll simply change the inquiry of the task. Okay, about the Ripper murders. Now that's quite a loose one at the moment, but it's just to give you an idea of what we're looking for. So the bit in yellow is the only bit that will ever change. That's what you need to imagine as an historian. What are you trying to find out more about? If it was asking how could you follow up source B to find out more about the life and times of Mr. Williams on a Sunday before returning to school, the sources are going to be very useful. But actually, it might be useful for us to find out more about the Ripper murders. As you can see, it says in your answer you must give the question you would ask and the type of source you would use. And that's referring to these 4 bits down the side here. Now, before I get onto them, let's actually look at the source we've got. So we've got a sketch by the police surgeon of the City of London Police of Catherine Eddowes' body at Meter Square. Quite a lot of detail there, but simply this is a sketch of one of the victims of Jack the Ripper. Now, you would have obviously already talked about how this source is useful and how this matches your knowledge in the previous question, but all we need to simply do now is find a detail in the source that will allow us to learn more about the Ripper murders. So this is what this bit here is talking about. Detail in the source, I would follow up. These two need to link. So the detail you're going to follow up on all these questions need to allow you to learn more about the Ripper murders. So what you're doing is basically being the historian, being the investigator, trying to find out more about the Ripper murders, and you've got to start off with your clues in front of you. So my first clue is source B. So then I've got to simply say is, hang on, what part of source B would I like to learn more about, or the detail in source B that I would like to learn more about and follow up to help me learn more about the Ripper murders. So I've actually done a Blue Peter, so if I keep scrolling down, I've decided the part of the source that I would like to follow up is the injury sustained around the chest area. So for this first part, you must always make sure that you do not ask a question. A lot of people are always tempted to say, in the detail in the source I would follow up, to say, how did they get the chest injuries? No, you simply have to identify a part of the source. And it's always the obvious part. If I was to say their left boot, okay, it's probably not going to be that useful for me. It's the bit that's obvious in front of me. The injuries around the chest area here. So those are the bits of the source that I would like to follow up. That's going to give me a mark. Tick. And there's my mark for doing so well. Oh. Now, you simply then have to ask a question which is going to help us learn more about the Ripper murders. So my question is, well, how were these injuries sustained? Okay, you could have come in with different questions, but as long as this question is going to help you to learn more about the Ripper murders and it relates to the part of the source that you're following up. So therefore, I simply said, how are these injuries sustained? There's a question. But this is where you've got to do the thinking. How are you as a historian going to be able to find out about how these injuries were sustained? You have to find a historical source which will answer this above question. This is where I come back to all of my sources at the start. So if I wanted to learn about more how these injuries were sustained, I've got to admit it would be quite rubbish to look at Charles Booth's survey because all he did was talk about housing conditions. If I was to look at the census, well, that's not going to really tell me about it because that will tell me who lived where. It's not going to tell me how the injuries were sustained. You could theoretically have started, you might have gone for London newspapers, because obviously that might then they might have a report in there about how it happened. The local police records might have had a report in there. The photographs, you could argue, might give a lot more detail than the source there. But the one I'm going to go for is the coroner's records. These are records to determine how many deaths have occurred in Whitechapel, and they were there to determine the methods of killing by Jack the Ripper. So if I go back down, that's my answer. I said, what type of source can I use to help me answer this question? Well, I'm going to use Whitechapel's coroner's records. There's my third mark. Thanking Stuart or Mrs. Examiner. And therefore, you simply have to explain why would this source here help you answer this above question. So my question was, how were the injuries sustained? I've said I'm going to use the Whitechapel's coroner's records, and I'm going to say, well, that's going to help me answer this question because, and this is probably where you're going to have to do the most writing, because the coroner's determined how people died. They would have included reports by doctors, including pathologists, who assessed how injuries or deaths occurred. This would include the weapons used and how the weapons were used to cause such damage. Okay, I'm a bit convoluted in my answers there, admittedly, but I've said, well, because the coroner's records is going to include a report of how the injuries were sustained. This therefore will allow me to answer my question, which in turn is allowing me to learn more about the Ripper murders. And that is all we have to do. Is first of all find a part of the source you're going to follow up, ask a question about them, tell me what source you're going to use and how that source is going to be useful. Try it with all of the different sources that are available for you on Google Classroom. That's history with Mr. Williams. Goodbye!